Hello there, how are you doing? Welcome to the Saroy channel. I hope you're doing very well. Lots and lots of love to each and every one of you. And those of you who've had a hard day at work, I've got a lovely story for you. So don't forget to get that quintessential drink so that you can sit down and relax and enjoy a lovely story. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And if you're drinking something very unusual, please do let me know about it and whereabouts in the world you're from. So let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, the wind whistled through the blue spruce and Engelmann pine trees as the two boys entered the woodland area, where Great Uncle Joey would regularly go hunting for wild turkey with them. But on this specific occasion, Great Uncle Joey was nowhere to be seen, for the two exuberant boys were embarking on this marvellous adventure alone, before the sun had even basked its gloriously golden head over the valley to grace a brand new day. So let's just say they'd crept out while the dark, shady, inauspicious night was still projecting its sultry, oppressive course. Naturally, the two boys, both brothers at the time, Maxwell, who was 11, Miles, who was 12, who were from the city of Denver, Colorado, had been cordially invited to attend regular hunts with their uncle as a happy trio, but never once had Great Uncle Joey agreed to let them even pull the trigger or take down the feathery quarry for themselves. Why ever not? It was absolutely ridiculous. It wasn't as if they were not being supervised, for goodness sake. Yet Uncle Joey would lay down the law like a formidable headmaster, waggling his finger at them warningly. I know it's disappointing, boys, but you're far too young to start shooting on your own. Good things come to he who waits. When you're older, you'll be able to hunt yourselves, but most certainly not now. Uncle Joe had strict, hard and fast rules about hunting. Maxwell secretly thought he wasn't the greatest hunter anyway, as he'd seen his Uncle Joey fire some dodgy shots that would have made a marksman blush, quake in his boots with a humiliating shame, if he was unfortunate enough to have to claim ownership to such hideously cloddish manoeuvres that lacked the nimble proficiency and prowess of a hardened professional. Of course, those derisive, contemptuous and somewhat pillaring thoughts concerning his uncle's obvious lack of hunting prowess were kept privately to himself, as there were some things you didn't share. This was one of them, when tact and sensitivity required dutiful employment. Great Uncle Joey was their grandmother's brother. He regularly invited the two kids to stay in his rustic off-grid mountain cabin, overlooking the Spanish Peaks, located southwest of Herfano County in Colorado, southeast of the city of Trinidad, at a 7,000-foot elevation, close to the Spanish Peaks wildlife area, where the two young boys often went elk hunting with their Uncle Joey, although of course it was always Uncle Joey that fired the quintessential lethal shot. It was 40 miles from the Boza de Osco State Wildlife Area, of over 30,000 acres of wilderness, another prime location they would frequent regularly with their uncle for a spot of trout fishing. At least when it came to fishing, Great Uncle Joey didn't cramp their style there. He'd allow them to cast out their own nets. You had to be grateful for small mercies, however small they may actually be. The two children were staying with Great Uncle Joey and his wife Hazel for a couple of weeks, while their parents were abroad in Ireland visiting relatives on their father's side of the family, as many of his father's ancestors had immigrated to America during the potato famine in 1845, but there was still a remnant of their bloodline still living back in Ireland. It was during the dinner the previous night that Great Uncle Joey had complained bitterly of some really tortuous stomach cramps that he had begun experiencing. Naturally, Maxwell was surprised, as the meal they'd just eaten was absolutely delicious. Unlike his mother's lousy, insipid, washed-out cooking, Aunt Hazel could literally prepare a feast for a king without even twitching her fingers. She was a natural cook. Maxwell knew that Great Uncle Joey's adverse stomach condition was not a result of bad food or poisoning of any kind, because the melt-in-the-mouth cooked trout, along with the mashed potatoes they had just eaten, had been absolutely delicious. The boys both watched in horror as Great Uncle Joey, who was a big man, all 6 foot 220 pounds of him, had holstered himself up from the table like a lumbering elephant, clutching the side of his stomach with his large hands, his face growing as white as paper, his brown eyes filled with terror.
"Hazel! Hazel!" he cried. I think I might be dying. There's something terribly wrong with me. My stomach is cramping violently. I think you ought to call Dr. Anderson at once, before it's too late. My stomach feels as if it's about to explode in any minute. Maybe I've got appendicitis. Maybe I've got advanced bowel cancer. Maybe I have irritable bowel disease. Or maybe I've got one of those god-awful worms. What do you call them? Maybe I have a tapeworm crawling up in my guts, laying eggs in my stomach. Maybe they're about to hatch and wreak havoc on my bowels. Oh my God, he said, his whole body quivering like a Portuguese man of war. Oh my God, I think I can feel them wiggling, gnawing at my insides. The worms are everywhere. Or is it something else? I can't be sure. Whatever this is, he said, slowing down his voice for maximum impact. Whatever this is, it's definitely terminal. At these startling revelations, Maxwell and his brother glanced at each other with alarmed, disconcerted expressions upon their faces. This must be it, Maxwell thought to himself. Poor Uncle Joey is about to keel over and die. The horrifying, daunting possibility was like a sharp, painful stab in his guts. His face became downcast, his heart heavy, as he thought about how much less fun it would be without Uncle Joey around. All those exciting outdoor sanguine adventures they shared together would all be but a fleeting memory, a hazy blur on the horizon of their minds that would become fainter, vaguer, indeterminate, until it faded away into obscurity with the passing of time, until one day they became so bleached out that they would completely forget Uncle Joey altogether. Maxwell only had a brief recollection of his cat Arthur, who he had loved so much, but had been run over by a truck 2 years prior. He could barely remember the cat now. It was all but a distant, almost foggy cloud in his mind. Would it be the same if Uncle Joey were to pass away? He seriously hoped not, even though Uncle Joey could be exceedingly annoying, especially when they went hunting and were not allowed to shoot a damn thing. Even so, he knew he'd miss the man, warts and all. Both boys had been secretly appalled by their great-aunt Hazel's dismissive, almost indifferent, nonchalant behaviour towards Uncle Joey and his grievously serious condition. They could see for themselves that the poor man was clearly fading away before their very eyes, as the life was ebbing out of his body faster than water gushing down the kitchen sink. Anyone could see that from a mile away. Yet the impassive, apathetic, seemingly cavalier great-aunt Hazel, although acting as if she cared about Uncle Joey's plight, underneath it all she appeared to be playing some kind of insidious, callous charade, which made both boys feel quite nauseously disgusted. Did great-aunt Hazel want her husband to die, they wondered? Why wasn't she calling the emergency services out at once? Or failing that, at the very least, calling out Dr. Anderson? What on earth was wrong with her? Could she not see that her husband was withering away, like a wilting flower in the meadow? She was doing nothing about it at all. Had she lost leave of her senses, or did she have some other nefarious agenda? A vast inheritance blinking at her brightly in the future. A hefty life insurance policy, perhaps. Yet this was exceedingly unlikely, since the couple had never really had much money to rub together. But something strange was seriously up. They had watched their aunt tenderly direct her husband towards his bedroom, a very Spartan, simplistic room at the furthest end of the cosy cabin, that pretty much just contained a large king-size bed, a chestnut bureau, along with 2 side tables with kerosene lamps. The cabin was made from quality timber beams that great-uncle Joey had erected himself 10 years earlier, when he and his wife had decided to retire into this part of the world and live off-grid, which they did with a flourishing, thriving success. They even had a composting toilet, which didn't smell at all, something that never failed to impress the 2 young boys. "Come this way, sweetheart," she'd said to Joey. "Just you wait and see. It's going to be absolutely all right. I promise you, you're going to be fine." The 2 boys stood in the doorway, watching great-aunt Hazel pulling back the bed-sheets, guiding her husband into bed, wrapping the sheets around him comfortably, while puffing up his pillows behind him, and mopping up his clammy forehead with a cool sponge.
There you are. Doesn't that feel so much better? Now, doesn't that feel better?
You must give Dr. Anderson a call now, cried Uncle Joey. Hurry up! Hurry up!
I'll give him a call, she assured him dispassionately, swiftly leaving the bedroom, with Maxwell and his brother following behind her like two devoted toy poodles. To his immense bewilderment, his aunt didn't even bother to call the doctor. She simply returned to the bedroom with a glass in her hand, filled with a milky, cloudy-looking liquid. She seated herself on the edge of the cosy king-size bed, while her husband continued to groan.
Oh, it hurts, Hazel. It really hurts, he said, moaning.
Oh, I know, sweetheart. I imagine it does. Dr. Anderson will pop around shortly. But he's very sure, based on your symptoms, you've just got a spot of gastritis. Nothing very serious or life-threatening to worry about, he assures me. You just need some antacids and penicillin, she said, handing her husband a milky concoction. Here, drink this, sweetheart. You're going to feel so much better. I can promise you of that. Great-uncle Joey sat up to drink the liquid, quivering violently like a jelly, as he swallowed the bitter concoction, looking the picture of misery wrapped up in self-pity. Is Uncle Joey dying, Aunt Hazel? Asked Maxwell, watching his uncle sit up, while cowering over in pain, clutching his stomach dramatically. He released some audible groans that would make the less well-informed think he was probably about to pop his clogs in any moment.
Oh!
No, whispered Great-aunt Hazel. No, Joey's not dying. He's just got a spot of gastritis, that's all. But I'll let you into a very big secret. Every time your great-uncle falls ill, he becomes like a helpless, pathetic baby. He's always 100% convinced he's about to die. But Aunt Hazel, he seems to be buckling over in pain. Shouldn't you call the doctor? I mean, you didn't really call the doctor, did you? But maybe this time he really is dying. Sweetheart, said Great-aunt Hazel, gathering Maxwell generously in her arms, giving him a huge, affectionate, reassuring hug. If your great-uncle really was dying, he wouldn't have the energy to put on such a fabulous performance, would he? He'd be too sick to even bother. If he was like that, I'd definitely call Dr. Anderson. But with him clutching his stomach, accentuating those groans with maximum impact, I know that he's absolutely fine. He's done this hundreds of times before. This is nothing new. It's just another performance of his. Even his own doctor knows him. He says your Uncle Joey is the biggest baby he's ever seen, who believes he's contracted every illness known to man. Does he always do that, when he's sick? Asked Maxwell in astonishment. I mean, make such a song and dance about it. Always, whispered Hazel. I know my husband too well now. He loves to extract the maximum amount of sympathy when he's not well. He enjoys the attention and fuss, so I always humour him. Besides, he's always been a huge hypochondriac, falsely believes he's dying when he's quite well. A little graze on his knees, his knee is broken. A spot of blood, he's bleeding to death. A slight wheeze in the back of his throat, he's contracted lung cancer. Poor Dr. Anderson, he's had to give him hundreds of blood tests over the years, just to appease your uncle, to reassure him that all is well, that he's not dying. No, he hasn't got cancer. No, he's not dying of tick-bite fever. And no, he hasn't contracted a deadly pneumonia. You see, your uncle will look at a medical dictionary, unlike the rest of us, but read all the symptoms, deciding that he has every single disease. He told me once he was absolutely amazed he hadn't died a long time ago, since he has the symptoms of a plethora of different illnesses listed in the medical dictionary. He would be looking it up right now, deciding what he's got, if I hadn't hidden it from him. Believe me, over the years he's informed me that his appendix is about to burst, that he's got Lyme's disease, blood poisoning, kidney disease. He needs dialysis. You have no idea, kids, what I've been through. Dr. Anderson says your uncle is the epitome of the 3 men in the boat story who worked themselves into a frothy frenzy, believing that they had almost all the diseases in the medical dictionary, so they assumed they were all naturally dying. The doctor wrote out a prescription for the 3 men. Do you know what the prescription was? No, said Maxwell. What was it? His aunt chuckled. It was 1 pound of beef steak, 1 pint of beer every 6 hours. A 10-mile walk every morning, in bed every evening by 11 sharp. And the last thing he wrote on the script was, don't go filling your heads with things you don't understand. They were amazed that the doctor's prescription worked. They felt a whole lot better, because they weren't sick at all.
It had been blown up in their heads out of all proportion. Dr. Anderson does say you get a whole lot of hypochondriacs who do exactly the same thing, falsely diagnose their own conditions. But he says your Uncle Joey cuts the cake as far as being completely over the top in this regard. Maxwell could hear his uncle groaning again. Hazel! Hazel! I think I'm going to need some ginger ale to settle the stomach. The twinges. Oh, my God, the twinges. They're coming back. They're very, very nasty. You poor, poor thing, said Aunt Hazel, exaggerating her level of sympathy for Uncle Joey. She gave the kids a big wink as she rushed dutifully over to her husband's side to hold his hand in hers. She began to puff up his pillows all over again, which she had done only moments earlier. She took his temperature, straightened his bed, fulfilled the quintessential Florence Nightingale role, attending to her husband's needs. I'm so sorry, kids. I'm so sorry Uncle Joey is indisposed. Do you think you can keep yourselves entertained? Help yourselves to anything you fancy. Why not take a mountain bike ride down some of the open trails? Maxwell's account. It had been Miles' idea to get up at first light the following morning, with both our aunt and uncle conveniently indisposed, out of action, blissfully fast asleep in their beds. Let's go turkey hunting, he'd said. Uncle Joey will never ever know. We'll take his shotgun with us, the one he uses for shooting turkeys. We'll kill a whole turkey, show him that we're brilliant hunters. He'll see that even though we're young, we know exactly what we're doing. Besides, didn't Great Aunt Hazel say that we were free to entertain ourselves while Uncle Joey is sick, which means we can help ourselves to absolutely anything we want? And that includes the turkey shotgun. But what if we get into trouble for taking his shotgun? What then? I piped, feeling a rising level of unease. Well, if Uncle Joey throws a huge wobbly, we'll call his bluff. We'll say that Great Aunt Hazel told us to help ourselves to absolutely anything. And so we did. We took her at her word. We took the turkey shotgun. Now what's wrong with that? We'll act all innocent, look as if butter wouldn't melt in our mouths. It's called being resourceful with the truth. That's what it's called. Finally, my brother persuaded me against my own better judgment. He was always very persuasive, which was why, when he was older, he became a very successful attorney, winning cases for people, as his powers of persuasion, let's just say, have always been impressive. We quickly made some sandwiches, along with thermoses of hot chocolate, as well as leaving a note for my aunt saying, "Gone for a hike, to watch the sun rise. Not be gone for too long. Love, Miles and Maxwell. P.S. Hope Uncle Joey's feeling a lot better." And so it was at first light. Well, in truth, it wasn't light at all, as the world was marvellously swathed in a velvety darkness, with an ivory crescent moon breaking the severity of its bleak stronghold. Along with the clusters of silvery stars, we were able to make our escape from the wooden cabin, the squeaky rubber of our boots crunching the dewy turf beneath our cushioned soles. Thankfully, both armed with our light headgear, we were able to see our way clearly. I could feel the rise and fall of my chest as my heart began to thump. I was feeling exceedingly excited to be embracing the morning like this, bright and early. Perhaps it was the instinctive knowledge that Uncle Joey would not be terribly pleased with us, made the allure of this trip even more enticing. We were well used to getting up at this god-forsaken hour with Uncle Joey when going turkey hunting with him, but this morning it was exceedingly different for us. My brother and I were on a marvellous adventure together. Nothing could ever trump that. Ostensibly getting up at the crack of dawn was the best time to seamlessly blend into the environment unobserved by the indigenous wildlife, most especially the roosting turkeys, before the sun rose over the escarpment. We left the cabin moving with a proficient, skilled, nimble stealth that would have impressed even great Uncle Joey. We were dressed in our camouflage gear that our uncle had purchased for us. He told us that every part of our bodies needed to be well concealed, including our hands, as the wild turkeys, with their excellent eyesight, long-range peripheral vision, can spot you a mile away, or any sudden movement, so staying very still was a prerequisite for any self-respecting, successful turkey hunter. We'd also learnt the artful technique of calling from Uncle Joey, the precise staccato notes of the clucks and purrs and other more sophisticated sounds, all a masterful ruse to make a gobbler think that a hen is hankering around for him. It's a devious deception, I know, but if you get it right, you can take down a sizable turkey quite easily. That, of course, is if you're lucky, but the birds are clever, very sharp, not easily outwitted. I had visions in my head of shooting an enormous turkey that would dwarf any turkey that Great-Uncle Joey had ever shot. I couldn't wait to see his flabbergasted expression when he saw that we were proficient hunters indeed, in our own right, that very definitely did not need to be chaperoned by an adult. The wind was blowing fiercely, whistling through the statuesque pyramid-shaped trees, causing them to bob their needled boughs as if dancing to music. Yet under the looming dark shadows they appeared foreboding, menacing, like sultry humanoid giants clustered together in insidious, uncongenial groups, for the ambience between them seemed hostile. We trudged through the Sylvan with our focus directed towards the upcoming turkey shoot, our hearts ever hopeful for success. But the good news is that if we did fail in our endeavours, Uncle Jody would be none the wiser, so we didn't have to feel the humiliation of a failed hunt. I was beginning to feel awkward in my environment, rather like a fish out of water, as it felt as if there were eyes everywhere watching us, but these eyes weren't warm, nor were they welcoming. They left you feeling distinctly uneasy, as prickles of dread spiralled down my spine. I was beginning to feel seriously creeped out. What on earth was wrong with me? I persuaded myself that of course the dark was intimidating. It always had been. As soon as the sun rose across the valley, I knew that my heightened level of angst would ultimately leave like the wispy smoke from a chimney. One thing I did observe, though, was everything seemed disturbingly quiet. So quiet, in fact, that you could have heard a pin drop, or in my case, I could hear my heart fluttering and my breathing intensify. It was exceedingly odd, I thought, that there were no crickets or frog sounds. But then the upcoming morning was on the threshold or door of a brand new day that would soon ultimately open up to reveal its full glory. But for a brief moment it waited in the wings, like the curtains at a theatre. Then quite suddenly the curtains would open. A light would flicker over the horizon, until the dark sky would become dappled, bespeckled and powdered in a golden glaze, while the night faded into obscurity like a foggy mist. So perhaps I thought the crickets and frogs had retired for the night. I mean, that would make perfect sense, surely. My brother broke the stiff, awkward silence with his sombre words that only elevated my level of trepidation. "Don't you feel as if something is watching us? I feel as if eyes are everywhere. Hundreds and hundreds of eyes, all watching us. It's giving me the heebie-jeebies." "You feel it too. I thought it was just me," I stammered. "Perhaps this was a crazy idea. Perhaps we should not have come. Perhaps we should go back." "Don't be silly, Maxwell. I didn't expect you to be such a wuss. We didn't come here to pussy out at the last minute like a pathetic pair of scaredy cats." "But you said yourself you feel as if we're being watched." "And I do. But I'm not about to be intimidated, am I? I'm no wuss." "Neither am I said. "Good then, let's keep moving. Let's move closer to the water at the creek. As the old hunter's adage goes, they love to roost where they can hear their droppings hit the water. Now look for any signs of turkey droppings." "Is that even true?" I asked. "Of course it's true. But remember eyes and ears peeled. We also need to look for open areas, larger, more mature trees. As the turkeys avoid thick woods, it makes them feel insecure." "Look here," I whispered to my bro. "Look, there are turkey feathers here, lots of scat. This is the perfect spot for us to take cover. This is where they regularly frequent." We found a tree where a large hedgerow was growing between it, which we covered with a camouflage blanket that we'd brought along with us. We sat down on the earthen ground, waiting for the morning to grace us with her appearance. In the meantime we talked together in hushed voices, as I poured my brother a cup of hot chocolate from the thermos flask, while we tucked hungrily into our sandwiches. We'd certainly worked up an appetite. "Do you still feel unnerved?" my brother asked me. "Not any more," I said. "I feel a lot calmer." "Good. I do too." We eagerly ate our ham and cheese sandwiches as the soft light of the early morning caressed the sky in a sweeping golden hue. The smoky greyness of the twilight receded. The morning finally broke. Then no sooner had her first impressions been made. The forest burst forth with cheerful chirps, tweets and trills of the dawn chorus. I could feel my heart rate visibly slow down, my breathing begin to relax. I smiled and even chuckled to myself secretly, chastising myself for being a big baby earlier on. I was so glad that I'd overcome my irrational, unfounded fears that had no basis on reality whatsoever. I mean, this was a perfect day. What could ever go wrong? My mother always used to say that whatever you fear, barely ever comes into fruition. Of course, she was absolutely right. The sun was now filtering through the woodland canopy, its ethereal golden shafts gracing the earthen floor, with showers of twinkling light, so that it dappled the ferns in pretty shadows, while the water of the silvery creek literally twinkled, sparkled, glittered and gleamed. All of a sudden we heard a pounding sound. It was as if the earth between our feet was moving, as if a herd of bison was thundering towards us at an alarming, preposterous speed, as powerful hooves beat up, battered and hammered the earth. The noise was coming towards us. It was fast, efficient, speedy. Images of large, treacherous animals came flooding ungraciously into my mind, like a pugnacious, cantankerous elephant, or a disagreeable rhino. But then we weren't in Africa, were we? So what on earth was making this absurd, inexplicable rumbling noise? Nothing in this world, small or inconspicuous, could shake up the earth like this, make such a gargantuan commotion. In that moment I was locked in a stupefied fear, as if my vocal cords had been paralysed. There was a huge big fat ball trapped in the back of my throat. I could hear a small squeaky voice emanate from me, that I realised was mine. What's that? What's that? What in the heck is that? My brother's voice was sombre. It wobbled with uneasiness like a rickety, unstable, jiggling camping table that was about to collapse in any given moment. I don't know, he trembled, but whatever it is, it's big. As the transient sound neared its swift approach, the thunderous booming continued like a heavy drum. Boom, boom, boom. And then suddenly, as it had started, it then came to a sudden, pronounced stop. All was quiet for a moment, and for a second my brother and I drew breath again, as if assured that we were once again cushioned in safety. Whatever that grievous noise was, it wasn't coming our way any more. Well, so we hoped, with our fingers and toes secretly crossed. In a trice we heard the crunching of branches, saw the boughs of a large spruce tree jiggling precariously, while the whole tree shook violently. Then with a mighty snapping thrust, this tall tree came thrashing down with one almighty walloping crash, until it was lying flat upon the ground. That was when we saw him. There are no words in the entire universe that I can find adequately to describe what I was to discern, for standing with one monstrous foot strutted over a fallen tree was the most Herculean creature that I'd ever seen. It looked as horrifying as a demon from hell. I knew that he was looking directly at us, even though we were hiding behind the camouflage blanket. I was peeking through the hedgerow. I could see him clearly. I knew at once that this creature was a Bigfoot, for there is nothing else it could possibly have been, as it fit the stereotype profile of a Bigfoot to perfection. It was about 8 foot tall, covered in long black hair that literally gleamed. It was that shiny. The creature was built like a brick shithouse, no pun intended, for the creature was absolutely enormous. It boggles the mind that something that big can be so graceful, so agile, but this creature was all that, and much, much more. All I can say is that I doubt he could get through your front door without bending that pyramid-shaped head of his. But as for the creature resembling an ape, no, not really. Of course I get why people might say that, because of the long primate arms that hang well below the knees, that seem very similar to a orangutan or a mountain gorilla. Also the distinctive shape of the head, not to mention the body swathed in long flowing hair. But really, if I am going to be brutally honest with you, I would say he was more like a human giant, covered in hair. The strength of this thing, well, he was powerful, as every part of his body rippled with dense muscle. And those legs of his, they were hell of a stocky. My brother put his fingers to his lips. "It'll be all right," he whispered. "He can't see us. Just keep perfectly still." Was my brother being serious, I wondered? Could he not feel the creature's eyes upon us? I trembled, my words wobbling, my confidence flagging like a punctured hot air balloon. "Bro, we need to go. We really need to go," I practically begged him. It was too late, far too late. We heard a thumping sound. The camouflage blanket was ripped forcefully from the hedgerow. I could hear the fabric tearing apart. Then staring directly at us with blazing, angry, tempestuous, deep-set eyes filled with an incandescent rage was a Bigfoot. I was right. He had sensed we were here all along. Perhaps he'd known for a long time. I watched him in horror as he curled back his lips, growing fiercer and fiercer like a pit bull. The hot-headed creature let out the most god-awful ear-piercing roar that would easily cause glass to shatter. For a moment all was very still. Our knees trembled, crumbled, buckled beneath us. Our hearts, like the hands of a crotchety old clock, struggled to beat, while a hypothetical anaesthetist's needle deadened our instinctive response. For as try as we might to make our escape, we were frozen in terror to the spot. Our eyes filled with anguish as they locked into the eyes of this monstrous beast. I could hear him screaming in my mind, "Get out! Get out, or I will kill you! This is my place! Get out!" The tears began to trickle down my face like the raindrops on a window pane, as I tried desperately to maneuver my legs. My brother was screaming, "Run! Run! Run!" I clumsily managed to find my feet again. I started bolting through the woods as fast as I possibly could, while the Bigfoot remained hot on our trail, but he kept a distance. He began to throw rocks after us as we made our hasty escape. It was when my brother and I reached Great Uncle Joey's wooden cabin that we fell to the ground in a shattered, crumpled and dishevelled heap, far too exhausted to say a single word. We were like engines that had run out of fuel, or like an old rusty battery that was totally spent. We clutched the grass so tightly between our knuckles that we could actually see the white showing, our wide eyes staring into each other's with a transfixed open horror, for what seemed like an awful age. We said absolutely nothing, just lying on the grass, while the morning sunlight swept across our backs. It was my great-aunt Hazel who opened the front door of the cabin. She saw us prostrated in the grass. She wondered what was wrong with us. "What on earth is going on? Why do you look like you've been to hell and back?" "Because, Aunt Hazel, we have," I explained. She ushered us quickly into the kitchen, bustling around with a kettle on the gas hob. "You poor things! You both look as white as a sheet. What on earth happened?" "We saw a Bigfoot," I said. "A very angry Bigfoot." "You saw a Bigfoot?" said Aunt Hazel, repeating the words as if they were almost foreign to her. "You saw a Bigfoot?" All of a sudden the figure of Great Uncle Joey stood in the kitchen, hovering over us like an animated giraffe. "You saw a Bigfoot!" he said, his face breaking out into a wide open smile. "You saw a Bigfoot! Did you hear that, Hazel? They saw a Bigfoot. Where did you see it?" "Near where you take us turkey hunting." Great Uncle Joey began to run around the cabin frantically in a tearing rush, as if he had an urgent appointment to keep that he couldn't miss. He was throwing on his clothes frantically as fast as he possibly could, scrambling around for his video camera. "Sweetheart, aren't you feeling a little sick?" Hazel asked him. "Only moments ago you were—" Great Uncle Joey was trembling with excitement. Imagine if I get the quintessential shot, the very shot that everybody's been waiting for, that unequivocally proves that Bigfoot is real. My footage will be up in lights on every YouTube channel. Imagine people will want to interview me all over America. I will be famous like the Patterson Gremlin footage. Imagine," he said, his chest inflating, puffing up like an egotistical penguin. "Don't go into the woods, Uncle Joey," I begged. Please don't. That Bigfoot is very aggressive. We took your shotgun in there, I'm afraid. It's out there in the woods. We can't go back for it. We're too afraid." Great Uncle Joey barely reacted to this astonishing revelation, as if it was water off a duck's back. He ignored our protests as we watched in horror. He started running towards the woods with a rifle and video camera clutched in his hands. He looked like a man dashing after a bus that he'd missed. "There he goes," sighed Aunt Hazel, looking at us warily. "Your Great Uncle Joey is incorrigible. Did I not tell you the man was never sick? It was all in his head." Suffice to say, Great Uncle Joey did return to the cabin a little while later, like a flagging, punctured beach ball that had lost its buoyancy. We didn't need to ask. It was clear he hadn't encountered the Bigfoot that we'd seen earlier. He had recovered the turkey shotgun, using this fortunate discovery as the quintessential excuse to lay into us for being impertinent young boys to have the brass-neck nerve to ever consider hunting a turkey without adult supervision. "I told you, You cannot go shooting turkey on your own until you're old enough. We apologised to him profusely, but the following day we went turkey hunting with Uncle Joey, who I suspect was still sneakily keeping his eyes pinned for a sighting of a Bigfoot, as he'd sneakily brought his video camera along, something he never normally did, and he also insisted that the video kept rolling the whole time. Surprisingly, we weren't afraid to go into the woods again, as Uncle Joey's irrational enthusiasm had somehow rubbed off on us in regards to the Bigfoot that we'd encountered the previous day, which made us think that perhaps he never was planning to hurt us at all, but was just being rather territorial. I'm delighted to inform you that on the hunt we took down a large gobbler, but as for the big hairy humanoid known as Bigfoot, we regretfully never saw him again. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.